Hi, I'm Greg. Welcome to Affect Studio. I'm here to compare 10 and 12-inch speakers and hear how much difference there is in tone when we're only hearing them via a mic. I know people who insist that 10s never sound as good as 12s. I'm not sure if that's simply because they've always been smaller amps that don't sound as impressive alongside bigger amps in the room, or if there is something to it. While doing the comparison of 10-inch speakers, it occurred to me that I had 3 sets of speakers where I had the 10 and 12-inch versions of the same model. As close as we'll get to comparing like for like. This video is basically in 2 parts. For the first section I've used a pair of tweed style cabs, a 5F11 Vibrolux and 5E3 Deluxe. These have almost identical dimensions, which is unusual for amps with different size speakers. For the second part I used my Princeton Reverb and Deluxe Reverb cabs. These are different in size and better represent the usual variation between amps with different size speakers, where cab dimensions correlate to the size of the speaker. First example is the middle position on my P90 equipped Les Paul into the amp of a Marshall Astoria. Remember, this isn't about which speaker we prefer, although you're welcome to do that, but how the different size speakers compare. In other words, is bigger better? Next is a Danelectro Baritone into my AC10 for some extended low end. I've changed the order of the speakers for each of these clips so we get a slightly different perspective each time. The pairs are always together though, as that's what we're comparing. The next clip is using a neck pickup on my Les Paul Special through the cranked Supro. I swapped mics to the next one just to hear if that revealed anything different. This is my SG Junior into the Astoria. Recording has always been the great leveler for different sized amps. Once you've adjusted the input gain on the console and recorded it, the size and volume of the amp becomes irrelevant. All that matters is how good it sounds through the mic. With an increasing number of stages becoming amp-free, so our audience is only hearing us through the PA, the way it sounds through the mic has become more important than ever. Changing now to the 60s style Fender cabs, this is both pickups from my SG Standard into a Brownface Fender circuit. I learnt early in my career recording bands that smaller amps often sound bigger on tape. The larger amps usually sound more impressive in the room, but are often more difficult to capture well. Finally, this is a bridge humbucker on my other Les Paul into the cranked Astoria again. So what did you observe? With the tweed cabs, there seemed to be more low end from the 10s and 12s, which I hadn't expected. Other than that, I wasn't hearing them as different size speakers, just as different speakers. Like we were listening to a speaker comparison. There was a greater difference with the different size 60 style cabs. The 10s were more focused in the mids, while the 12s seemed to have more top and bottom. Once again, demonstrating that the cab shapes the tone more than the speaker in it. So that's it. Were the differences what you expected? Anything surprising? Leave a comment, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Hit the drop down menu and press the bell icon when you subscribe so that you get a notification when I make more of these. And I'll see you soon.